This quilt today I'm doing edge to edge. The reason I'm doing that is there are different size borders on it. The outside borders are quite wide, but the side borders are wider than the top and bottom borders. And the contrast borders, which are the white, are larger at the top and bottom than they are at the sides. So it makes it very difficult to fit a pattern into that would match with all those borders of different sizes. Using Aurifil 50 weight variegated thread. It's a bit of an aquamarine blue-green color because that's basically what the color in the quilt is. I didn't want to do white. White tends to look too thready. It kind of sits all over the top. It's a very geometric design, so I chose the pattern called Leaforama, which is very curvy and kind of flowing. Basically, it's swirling leaves. It's very important to pick a pattern that suits the quilt. I feel that if it's very geometric, I want to do something that contrasts that, so that's why I go to the leafy kind of swirly patterns for a quilt like that. And if it's a very swirly quilt like an applique or something, I'll often go to a geometric to just complement it, because the quilting really is there to complement the piecing. The Aurifil 50 weight is a really nice thread to work with. I use it top and bottom. I find it's much easier to balance the stitches when you use the same thread top and bottom. Quite often you're partway through a quilt before you get a chance to roll it and see how your tension is. And if you use the same thread top and bottom, it's much more easy to balance. This machine has a really nice tension device with it too, so I tend to balance my threads and check my tension every time I change threads. So now you can see it a little bit. It's very kind of circular, which is nice. And this color breaks up the white. If I were to use white thread, you wouldn't see it on the white, but you really see it on the green. So I figured the green thread is a really good choice. It's rather a large quilt. So what I do, and you can't see that here, but on the top rail, I will put a pin on either side to balance the quilt as it rolls up so that it's equally balanced left to right. Sometimes on a bigger quilt it tends to move a little bit one way or the other, it shifts. So if you put a pin in your top rail and as you pull it up you can check that to make sure. And if you have to tug it a little bit, then you can do it before you start to quilt. I don't use the top rail because I don't pin my tops down or the batting. I let everything float because that way if, say there's a little bit of a bump in the batting, then I can easily adjust it. I can pull the top out of the way and tug at the batting without having to unpin anything and make it like a big deal. So it makes it much easier to check more often to make sure you're on the right trail. This particular pattern is an edge to edge. It's a pentagraph. You could put it in the middle if you want, because this is probably 7 or 8 repeats to get across the quilt. What I like to do is mirror image it so that it starts on the left side on one row and the right side on the next row, and vice versa. And that way it gives you a bit of a variation in design. Even though the design is exactly the same, it's starting from the opposite side and you get a little bit of a different look. So you have the same curly cue on the left side all the way down the quilt or on the right side. Sometimes I can also turn it upside down, but that depends on how it looks on the quilt. Sometimes that will cause it to run into the previous row or leave big gaps between it and the next row. You can also adjust your nesting so you can push the designs closer together or further apart, depending on the kind of space that you want. I like it when the space doesn't show, so it looks like the entire quilt is actually done as a row. You can't see where it starts and stops. So generally if you nest it, that's the best way to achieve that. going to go across the quilt. When it gets to the left side, then I can turn it to the next row, and once again choose that orientation point, which is the first stitch, or actually the last stitch of the row. And then when the machine moves to the first position of the next row, it knows exactly where it is. That way when you get to the bottom of the quilt, you don't have a lot of surprises and a pattern that doesn't fit the space that's left for it to go into. And that's it for this one.